The history of America is the history of the struggle for independence. Prior to the arrival of the European settlers, anarchic Indian tribes were scattered about the continent. The American Indians possessed many different customs among themselves and lacked an overarching central government. When the earliest Europeans planted roots in the colonies of Jamestown and Plymouth Rock, they did so seeking fortune, adventure, or refuge from religious persecution. As the colonies grew, 70% of the European arrivals were white indentured servants. The first African slaves were imported into North America in 1619. Most slaves were black and were held by whites, although some American Indians and free blacks also held slaves. There were a smaller number of white slaves as well. It was these three racial groups, American Indians, white Europeans, and black Africans, who would become the foundation of American culture and civilization. The early American colonies also contained what would become the religious foundations of American society. These colonies provided independence for Quakers, Baptists, the Calvinist Puritans, Methodists, Mennonites, Amish, Hutterites, Jews, and later the Mormons of Utah, all of whom would have been subject to persecution under the theocracies of Europe. The War of Independence that erupted in 1776 marked a formal break from the old feudal order of Europe. Early American society was a nation of farmers, pioneers, and prospectors who continued to push westward in their wagon trains and whose frontier towns created the legendary anarchic culture of the Old West. The anti-slavery movement formed the Underground Railroad for the purpose of helping fugitive slaves find their way to freedom. The Liberty Party and the Free Soil Party, established by an alliance of abolitionists and nativists, eventually became the foundation of the anti-slavery Republicans. A monumentally destructive civil war between 1861 and 1865 marked the end of the slave system in the southern states, but at the cost of the creation of a regime in Washington, D.C. with unprecedented levels of power. Such had been the goal of the mercantile interest behind the Lincoln presidency. Lincoln himself had said, "My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union. It is not either to save or to destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that." Lincoln's destruction of the American Confederation of States proved to be the pivotal event that set the stage for the growth of the tyrannical empire that rules America today. After the Civil War, a ruling class of state capitalist robber barons emerged, and the merchant and banker interests that Jefferson had warned against began to exercise greater power over American life. The early American revolutionary leader Samuel Adams had proclaimed to future generations of Americans, "If ye love wealth greater than liberty, the tranquility of servitude greater than the animating contest for freedom, go home from us in peace. We seek not your counsel, not your arms. Crouch down and lick the hand that feeds you. May your chains set lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that ye were our countrymen." America likewise began to abandon her earlier neutrality in matters of foreign relations. Over the next century, an endless series of wars served to expand the American state into a world empire the size of which had not been seen since the days of ancient Rome. The Spanish-American War, the Philippine-American War, World War I, World War II, the Cold War, and the wars in Korea and Vietnam consolidated the domination of American society by what President Eisenhower would call the military-industrial complex.
We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
Yet during the time that the American empire was only beginning to develop, a new movement which had begun in Europe found its way into the United States through the waves of European immigrants that came to America in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. This new radical movement was called anarchism. The movement's founding fathers originated from countries like France, Russia, Spain, Germany, and Italy. Some of their leaders came from peasant origins, like Pierre-Joseph Proudhon. Others, like Mikhail Bakunin and Peter Kropotkin, were dissidents from the ranks of the aristocracy. The most famous American anarchist was Emma Goldman.
Mr. Oldman, should the government here object to your speeches of anarchism, would you change them or leave the country?
I will leave the country rather than deny my ideas.
With the possible exception of Spain and some other Latin countries with suitable traditions, there was no nation on earth where anarchism was more compatible with the traditional political culture than America. Anarchism can easily be seen as the logical outgrowth of the Jeffersonian philosophy that classical American ideals were rooted in.
Today, Americans face a seemingly endless list of oppressions. These include a political class and corporate and banking elites that live off the sweat of working people and taxpayers, a series of failed and unpopular wars, the domination of American foreign policy by foreign lobbies, a prison industrial complex that holds nearly 1 in 30 Americans as wards of the legal system, out-of-control paramilitary police forces that terrorize private citizens, oppressive taxes, intrusive government, corrupt and incompetent officials, and the dismantling of the American middle class under the guise of creating a global economy. The state consumes nearly 40% of America's gross domestic product, as Thomas Jefferson warned. I predict future happiness for Americans if they can prevent the government from wasting the labors of the people under the pretense of taking care of them. The greatest political battle in post-World War II America was the battle for civil rights for African Americans during the 1950s and 60s.
I am blind, and I cannot see.
Unfortunately, the black civil rights movement was co-opted by the state and the ruling class as a means of suppressing its more radical elements and struggles for authentic black self-determination. American elites were embarrassed by the Jim Crow system of the American South, and Southern racism fueled the Cold War propaganda efforts of the communist countries that claimed to represent the oppressed worldwide. The solution was to buy off the black elites with an elaborate system of institutional privileges, create a state-dependent black middle class through public sector employment, affirmative action, and so-called diversity initiatives, while pacifying and subjugating the lower classes with the welfare state and the prison system.
African Americans face high unemployment rates due to the loss of industrial jobs in American cities. The war on drugs has created a situation where 1 in 3 black males is under the supervision of the criminal justice system. African Americans are 13% of the U.S. population, but account for nearly 1/2 of the murder victims. More than 2/3 African American children come from broken families.
To keep this system in place also requires an extensive amount of discrimination against whites.
European Americans face discrimination through affirmative action, racial preferences in hiring, job promotions and college admissions, speech codes imposed by institutions of higher learning, restrictions on freedom of association, the censorship of political correctness, mass immigration, bias and hate crimes reporting, the double standard used to label people as racist, and vigilante violence against those who express dissenting opinions.
Historically, Western civilization was plagued by religious conflict, which was only resolved through the eventual separation of church and state. That was an idea, of course, that was eventually formalized by the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. Ultimately, the only possible solution to racial conflict is to remove the state from racial issues altogether and to create a system of separation of race and state based on the model of separation of church and state.
As the American economy declines and the gap between the social classes widens, the elites seek to divide Americans along cultural lines so as to prevent the emergence of a unified resistance to the overlords of the empire, the global economy, and big government. The state and the ruling class used the culture wars as a means of pitting Americans against one another. The solution is a return to the American tradition of independent communities.
American traditions, begotten of religious rebellion, small self-sustaining communities, isolated conditions, and hard pioneer life, grew during the colonization period of 170 years from the settling of Jamestown to the outburst of the Revolution. Among the fundamental likeness between the revolutionary Republicans and the anarchists is the recognition that the little must precede the great, that the local must be the basis of the general, that there can be a free federation only when there are free communities to federate, that the spirit of the latter is carried into the councils of the former, and a local tyranny may thus become an instrument for general enslavement. Convinced of the supreme importance of ridding the municipalities of the institutions of tyranny, the most strenuous advocates of independence, instead of spending their efforts mainly in the General Congress, devoted themselves to their home localities, endeavoring to work out of the minds of their neighbors and fellow colonists the institutions of entailed property, of a state church, of a class-divided people, even the institution of African slavery itself. The author of the Declaration of Independence, who in the fall of '76 declined a re-election to Congress in order to return to Virginia and do his work in his own local assembly, in arranging there for public education which he justly considered a matter of common concern, said his advocacy of public schools was not with any view to take its ordinary branches out of the hands of private enterprise, which manages so much better the concerns to which it is equal, and in endeavoring to make clear the restrictions of the Constitution upon the functions of the general government. He likewise said, "Let the general government be reduced to foreign concerns only, and let our affairs be disentangled from those of all other nations, except as to commerce, which the merchants will manage for themselves, and the general government may be reduced to a very simple organization, and a very inexpensive one, a few plain duties to be performed by a few servants." This, then, was the American tradition, that private enterprise manages better all that to which it is equal. Anarchism declares that private enterprise, whether individual or cooperative, is equal to all the undertakings of society.
It is in the context of such communities that controversial issues such as abortion, gay marriage, crime, and immigration should be managed. The ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle noted that the great cities of classical civilization possessed over 150 different constitutions among them. The great American diplomat George Kennan called for the devolution of the United States into a collection of city-states and constituent republics. The famous writer Norman Mailer ran for mayor of New York City in 1969 under the slogan of "Power to the Neighborhoods." It is in such ideas that we find hope for America's future.
Remind you that extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice.
But I believe that when a man is exercising extremism, a human being is exercising extremism in defense of liberty for human beings, it's no vice.
I remind you also that moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue.
And when one is moderate in the pursuit of justice for human beings, I say he's a sinner.
Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? Which side?